My name is Phillip Nguyen, and I'm the Executive Director for the Vietnamese American Roundtable. I'm also the co-chair of the Young Vietnamese Americans Committee for the Pivot, the Progressive Vietnamese American Network. I'm the MC for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, hosted by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. I'm also the president of the Union of North American Vietnamese Student Associations, or Unafsa, and I teach Asian American Studies in the Asian American Studies Department at San Francisco State University.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over the world. So, what does it mean to be Vietnamese to you?
Oh, it's a tough question to start off with, but I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Trying to prepare to come on for this interview with you. I think for me, Vietnameseness, or the idea of Vietnamese, centers around silence, suffering, and sacrifice for me, or at least that's how I've been able to understand my own sense of Vietnameseness. Coming from Vietnamese refugee parents, being born in the United States in Lancaster, California, and trying to understand, I think, for me, what love meant and how it could be translated between English and Vietnamese really informed the silences that I experienced growing up. At the dinner table when we're not really so sure what to say in English or Vietnamese. This idea of sacrifice that motivated me to get an education, right? That my parents sacrificed everything and more, leaving their country to come to the United States. And this idea of suffering, right? I think there's this term in Vietnamese that I hold pretty near and dear. It's rang tu, right? And I don't think there are many more Vietnamese phrases than rang tu, right? So
That's a great observation. That word, you're right. There's no. I'm trying to think of the proper translation for "rangju," like try to endure.
yeah, it's like do your best to endure.
But it also means something other, a little bit more sinister. Is like, oh, that's your fault.
Yeah, it's just kind of just like get through it, right? Whatever
Get
it
through
is,
it.
just
Yeah,
like
just that's on you. Rank.
yeah. So I guess it's a double-edged sword, right? It speaks to both the resilience of the Vietnamese person and the shit that you're kind of put through, right?
Yeah.
Like inheriting this identity.
Yeah. So, were you born and raised in Lancaster,
Yeah,
California?
I was. It's a for folks that don't know where Lancaster is, it's an exurb that's about a mile or an hour and a half away from the Orange County, Little Saigon.
It's weird that it's not weird. It's interesting that you point out that it's because I'm thinking like Lancaster to LA, right? In my head, I'm
Right.
like trying to map it out, but yeah, it's an hour and a half from OC, and it's kind of as I was growing up, I remember Lancaster as being in the desert.
Yeah,
Or am
no,
I
for
off?
sure. It's the boonies for sure. Um, and I think it makes more sense to relate it to where LA is. It's about, it's the northernmost part of LA. And it is in the desert. The only landmark that usually folks point to is Magic Mountain, is like 45 minutes away. And
Wow.
Lancaster's the desert beyond that. So
You're further out than Magic Mountain.
further out than Magic Mountain.
How did your parents arrive in Lancaster?
Oh, that's a solid question as well. It actually starts with, I mean, as all Viet stories, I think, do, it starts with my grandparents. When they had first come to the United States, they actually ended up in the valley, San Fernando Valley, Reseda, Canoga Park. Um, After, my dad, my paternal side of the family, my dad is one of 10, one of 10. So, having the family be in this place where there were a lot of Vietnamese folks as well as a lot of other people of color that were mostly poor, right? They saw a lot of gang violence, and my grandfather was the one, and this is what I've heard, is that he didn't want to raise the grandchildren in a place with so much violence and where they would be susceptible to joining a gang and all of those sorts of things, right? And so he took the family and moved them out to the boonies where land was cheap. So it was both an economic decision as well as one that was made on behalf of me before I was born.
But there's nothing going on in Lancaster. Well, I'm figuring this is the '80s, right? I mean,
Yes.
There's nothing in my mind. And well, my mom bought and uncles bought like a little, a few acres out in Lancaster back then. And I remember them. I remember the conversations clearly. It was like in the 80s how there was nothing out there, but they were planning on putting an airstrip out there, and they're doing a lot of development out there. But there was nothing out there when they. So I'm thinking of your family and going, well, there's nothing out there, no industry, right, at the time.
Yeah, I think it was starting to, the airstrip and aeronautics was sort of the where the boom was going to happen.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, and fortunately, fast forward 20, 30 years later, my dad and my uncles worked in the aerospace industry.
interesting.
Um, but then I think it was really just the land was cheap, and that there was the 14, which leads into the 5, and you can get to LA in about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic. So
Well, and so what did they all do when they arrived in Lancaster? This massive family.
yeah, they commuted to LA for work. They worked with on microchips. And so the most of the men, my uncles, worked in microchip processing factories in the valley, and then my aunts, one of them opened up a nail salon in Lancaster, and they've moved from here to there, but generally a lot of the family or the aunts that come from Vietnam and marry into the family, they worked at that nail salon. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably one of the OG nail salons in Lancaster, right?
right, our family's been around in Lancaster for a hot minute since
Forever, yeah.
there aren't really other families. So
And you guys are Buddhist or Catholic?
we're Buddhist. Yeah, we're a Buddhist family, and I think that kind of maybe played into it too. I mean, I feel like being actually thinking about it now, growing up, like in addition to driving to the OC or Little Saigon, or to the valley where there were these pockets of Vietnamese community to get groceries, or mainly to get groceries. We also went there to when it was around Tet, or to go to Jewel. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Before we get started, I want to talk to you about the piece that's on your necklace.
yes,
Tell me a little bit about it. And for all the people that are not watching and are listening, there's a beautiful, I think it's jade. It looks like it's about 2 to 3 inches, fairly thick jade piece that's on Philip's gold necklace.
let me.
Yeah, but I'm describing it for the audio, for people who are just listening to the podcast. And I can't make out what it looks like from here, but it's a prominent, pretty big kiwi, the gold kiwi color jade. So yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Kenneth. I thought about coming onto this podcast and being amongst the long list of guests that have graced this podcast, right? And have been graced to be on this podcast. I was thinking about this question of Vietnameseness, and I felt like I should put on an outfit that evokes the sense of Kevin Nguyen, which is the millennial identity for the most well-known image of Vietnamese identity, right? But for me, I mean, this pendant really represents my relationship to family and my own faith. Growing up as in a Buddhist family, this chain was gifted to me by my mom. It's an upgrade from another chain that I had that I also wore with a jade pendant. And the jade pendant for me, for my jade pendant, I think a lot of people wear the Happy Buddha when you're usually people don't really wear the Happy Buddha, but or Phật Quang Âm, right? Or Phật A Di Đà, but this one is Wan Thande Wung, or Wan Gong, also known as Guan Yu, or the God of War. And for me, I grew up. One of the things that is significant from my experience growing up, and I think this negotiation with Vietnamese identity, is how I was taught to relate my own sense of identity to that of my parents and my grandparents. And for my Mang Doi, which is, we're coming up on the year of the water tiger, right? For me, I am a fire dog, I think, or Yap Tuc is the term in Vietnamese, and for that astrological sign, the protector, or the goddess, or the god or savior for that particular sign is Guan Yu, or Guan Gong. And for me, I think, like, for my mom to gift this to me, and for it to be passed on from my family, I think it's he's meant to represent brotherhood, righteousness, and I'm oftentimes reminded that whatever I'm doing or however it is that I'm making my way through life, that I nhớ to làm điều đúng, right? Or to stay away from những điều sai, right? To go towards those things that have always represented the sense of righteousness, right? And to stay away from this poor influences, right? And that the sense that, you know, there are the ancestors there that are watching over me and taking care of me in this lifetime. So,
You know, as I'm listening to your explanation, I realize how much tradition your mother and your family and a sense of sort of this identity pride is being handed off to you in something physical. But at the same time, you know, I didn't grow up with this sort of these symbolic pendants, and so I am starting to realize how important these things are, and I'm like, I need to go out and do this weekend and buy something like this and explain it to my daughter and son at this early age, and then give them something relatively cheap so they can wear, and then upgrade it as you are describing it right now.
I think that's the, like, I also didn't know the cultural significance at first, right? I thought it was just a shiny piece of jewelry that I could flex with my friends. But it wasn't until I had actually, for a short moment in time, lost the other necklace that I had. And then when I had lost it, my parents then began to tell me more about the significance of it. And I realized, like, oh shit, like I really, you know, messed up. But since then, you know, to feel like this pendant and this part of this thing that I wear each and every day, right, is my linkage to family and to my family history and heritage and identity, I think is has been a really powerful reminder to me, right? And you know, growing up, I don't know if other folks that are listening to the podcast also share this, but for me and my family, when I was ever in a moment where I felt tension or turmoil, I was often reminded to mo fuck, right? Or to nim fuck. And this, I mean, having a pretty, like a piece of jade to remind myself to be mindful of that, and to know that I have the ancestors watching over me is really,
that's powerful.
Has really been helpful. Yeah.
Really powerful. You know, was in the opposite camp. I always saw like people wearing pendants and this type of stuff as I was growing up as a sign of their Vietnameness. And I was repelled by that because I wanted to be more assimilated to the white culture. And so I always shied away, and I shut that part of my brain off. And I look at you now, and now I'm like, I want to be part of this, you know, this way of remembering my ancestors and being reminded of the power that are that we. What did I read? I think something like 12 generations into you being manufactured, there's like 4,000 people. If you do the math, it took 4,000 people or whatever to get to your one person. If you did like a reverse family tree, a reverse pyramid going up, it's like 4,000. So you're basically wearing the sort of the energy of, you know, that reverse pyramid on your body. And I think that makes so much sense. And I'm going to start, definitely.
I mean, I'm getting the chills as you're saying this too, right? Like this talk about the ancestors and the folks that came before us. I mean, I studied ethnic studies and Asian American studies, and one of the kind of sayings that we that is taught is no history, no self, right? Like if we don't have our history, there's no sense of self that we can relate to or identify with. And that if we know our own history, then in that way, it empowers us to learn about and know more about ourselves and how we operate in the world. So the weight of that carries, I think I feel like I carry with me, and it hangs very heavily on my neck too. But
and you know, as it should, because if you think about like the colonial or the Western powers, you know, the first thing they need to do is they need to strip you of your history. You need to be completely void of knowing anything about your predecessors, and, you know, like the American Indians, you know, let's wipe you all out. We'll start with the history books and, you know, erase that history. So there's no 4,000 people, you know, reverse pyramid sitting on that one pinnacle of the person that's still alive.
Right. Yeah, I think, oh my gosh, yeah, that sense of erasure that we feel like, and I mean, especially I mean, for between me and you, right? Like growing up in a place and thinking of Vietnameseness as something that you should throw away or not really think about often, right? Or not take pride in, and this feeling of looking to assimilate, right? Like, even though I feel like I was raised in a pretty traditional family, I didn't feel that sense of pride when I went out to school, right? Where I was oftentimes the only Vietnamese person. And I think in a similar vein, to know that I feel really fortunate to be able to wear jewelry like this, because so many of our parents, our aunts, uncles, predecessors had to give this up when they became refugees, right? Or had to sell it to gain passage to the United States and elsewhere in the diaspora.
Well, I'm just gonna say it right now. From here on out, if you guys see me busting out jade on these podcasts, you know where it came from first, which is here with Phillip Nguyen. So just to put it out there, I'm definitely going to start looking into it this year. I think it's a wonderful. You just like literally turned me on to a new thing that I'm so excited to start thinking about. My wife is really into jewelry, and I've just always been not a jewelry person ever. I just always like plain. But I look at how you have it, and I'm just like envisioning on my neck, and I'm like, that would be such a badass piece. I mean, badass in every which way. I mean, it's like this, for me, it's like this, like finally, like you can stand proud. I can stand proud and wear something like this and go, this is like the culture of where, because my uncles wear them. Yeah. I have family members that wear this, and I've always just been like that guy. I was born in the United States. I don't wear stuff like that. No, this, there has to be this rebirth, I think, for me. And then now, as a tradition to my children, upgrading them maybe every 5 years or every 4 years or something like that, sitting them down and creating this ritualized situation, maybe during Thet to maybe that's what I would do in a few weeks, when Thet comes around, get this pendant and kind of anoint them and anoint myself with my own, choice.
Yeah. And anoint, that's a beautiful word to use. And I think there's a sense of that in your family, you can be royalty, right? Yes. Or connected to royalty. And I mean, that's also why we both share the same last name, Nguyen, right? And, I also maybe want to add a qualifier that, like, I mean, on the podcast, and I think as I'm thinking about Vietnameseness, I want to be reminded, and I'm looking at myself with the pendant and like, damn, like if my mom saw me with this, she might not be so happy, because I'm trying to like, it's like huang too much, right? It's like showing up. And so I would also want to say that, you're not going to find me at the club rocking the chain out. And I think it's like doing, right? Or like, dependent on the situation.
Yes.
In times for that sort of meaningfulness to transcend, right? Because I do think that there are a lot of folks, right, when we're thinking about like folks in the younger generation that might not understand the history, or people who are trying to buy into that Asian look, right? Like they'll wear the jade piece in the chain, and we don't want that, right? Like we're doing this for the culture, we're doing this for ourselves and for our families. So yeah,
I've never had permission to do it. Now I do. Now I have a story, an origin story, like, because truth be told, you and I worked on that for like 2-3 minutes before we started rolling today. And I thought, wow, I'm like I find myself really engaged in showcasing that, and not have any confusing backgrounds or not confusing, but competing backgrounds to show off the piece. And I found myself like really into it. I was like, yo, we got to really, make this, and then here we are talking about it for all this time. And I love it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we want to talk about the 2-3 minutes before the start of the podcast, I was wearing this shirt. It was designed by this guy, Matthew Wu, who designed shirts based on OG 80s, 90s pop culture. It had Scotty Nguyen on it. And Scotty Nguyen is one of the World Series of Poker, one of the OG like Vietnamese poker players. And he would say like, you call it and it's all over, baby, right? And you would see him on TV. I remember seeing him on TV watching World Series of Poker. And he would be rocking like 3-4 of these like thick chains, right? Mm-hmm. And his like shades and his like, his perm. And he's sitting there like making the craziest all-in bets. And for a long time, that was my association with the Vietnamese uncle, right? That rocked the chains, or the Vietnamese guy that was, sipping on a Heineken. it wasn't for a long time until I think I had that gentle mother's touch to explain to me the significance of why we wear things like this, right? Um, Especially in a place I think where, an adopted homeland where we might feel like we might need that protection, right? I think speaks volumes to the experience of a refugee family in the United States or in the diaspora. So
That's powerful. So I'm beginning to understand where you're getting all of this activist spirit from, starting to materialize. But can you give me some background? I mean, is it a family thing, or is it, you bumped into a mentor when you were like 13 and you just started to have this like idea to one day really get into the activist side of living in the US?
yeah, thanks for that question, Kenneth. I would definitely not attribute, like I would, but I wouldn't, the sense of activism to my parents or my family. Um, I would say that it happened along the way and at when I started my undergraduate journey at UC Berkeley. There was the first time I went away from home. Um, I remember the process of applying to Berkeley. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I had uncles that told me to study business or biology or one of the traditional fields that Vietnamese parents would be proud of. And I remember I was in Key Club, and there were a couple of other Vietnamese American students that had a little bit more Vietnamese sensibility. And one of them had shared with me this book that was called "I Love You Czar for White People," and it's by Lac Su.
Let's see.
Yes. And at that same time, at home, my mom was watching SBTN like nonstop. My parents were watching SBTN nonstop. And Lac Su came on a show with Christine Sa, and he was talking about like growing up in East LA. And my mom, called me into the living room and was like, hey, like there's this guy that kind of looks like you and he's kind of talks like you. And, I think Lac Su was he had like a graduate degree, and my mom was like, why don't you do something like him, right? Like, why don't you write books? And I'm like, I don't know if I can write books, but I'll go ahead and, I'll continue to read this one. I'll finish reading this one. And through the course of the book began to, really think about what it meant, what love meant, right? How I love yous are for white people, how in the Vietnamese American family, we don't really talk about love, right? And so kind of fast forward to my experience at Berkeley and this, you attribute you call it that this activist spirit, right? But I still feel a little bit of wariness trying to claim that identity as an activist, because I think about so many activists like Yuri, like Grace Lee Boggs, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., whose day is coming up soon, right? Folks that came before me that I feel like did such important work. I would say that this part of me evolved, right? When I was able to share this sensibility of what it meant to be Vietnamese American or Southeast Asian American or just Asian American, to think about these things like love and how we understood love across generations, and to be able to share that during my student organizing experience at Berkeley. I participated in a couple of, I wasn't in VSA yet then, but I was in a program that helped get high school students into college. And so being able to share that experience, to tie it back to this idea of the model minority, right? And to know that there was this legacy of Asian American activists that had come before me, right? I decided on a whim to apply as an Asian American studies major. And I think that's what really sets off my own trajectory as I think an educator first, and maybe an activist, an advocate, an artist.
So wait, since we're going to talk about, I think we'll get into the VSA part of our discussion first. But before we get there, when did you join a VSA at Berkeley?
Yeah. Ooh. I didn't get involved in VSA until after I graduated from Berkeley.
Whoa. So wait a minute, 4 years at Berkeley, and okay, this is significant. Why didn't you join any Vietnamese student unions or associations at your time at Berkeley?
Yeah. Ooh. It's funny because I'm the president of Unafsa now.
Yes, it's
I
ironic.
when I went, I remember going to freshman year, the first week of school, all of the clubs are having their general meeting, their orientations. I remember going to a VSA meeting along with the other kind of AAPI related org meetings. Going to the meeting and feeling like it was whack. Like this wasn't like all the people that were there and what they were talking about. And this, I think the thing that really threw me off about the meeting was this NGM program, right, that they had. And it's a mentorship program that a lot of VSAs had. But for me as a freshman then, to come from the family that I came from and to still be in this process of trying to figure out what Vietnamese identity meant, to go into this space and then have people call themselves NGM, right? It felt really off-putting to me because those were terms that I feel like were reserved for my family, right? And whom I was really close to. And so I stayed away from VSA. I was really close to the people there, but I really had gotten involved in organizing with the broader AAPI community, student community at Berkeley, and with SAS, the Southeast Asian Student Coalition, that brought together folks that were tied or tethered to this history of the wars in Southeast Asia, right? And so it wasn't until after I graduated, I realized that they also had a high school youth mentorship program called Vision that they had reached out to me to be a mentor for, and I had led a workshop for that program. And when I was able to lead a workshop for that program, I realized a little bit, and I kind of let myself lean into that Vietnamese student experience a little bit more. And from then I kind of realized, what the significance of having this things like an NGM program or a mentorship program, or trying to foster this sense of family away from your biological family, how important that was for my own experience of identity. So.
Well, I'm very surprised that that one meeting would be able to throw you off or anybody off, and it makes sense. I get it, and it's not like you didn't partake in anything out. I mean, I think it almost sounds like you took maybe a 30,000 feet view of the of the AAPI sort of situation, rather than a very myopic being in a tighter cultural space like the Vietnamese Student Association.
Right. And I'm not sure if I was ready to be in a Vietnamese Student Association yet, right? Like I grew up on the MySpace, like Viet Pride kind of era, right? Listening to Vietnamese American rappers like Khánh Nhã and Phong Lê, right? And I kind of associated my Vietnameseness with that, somewhere between that and my parents. And so to see all these Vietnamese students, also speaking Vietnamese to each other, like that was really weird to me then, right? Because like that was also something that was just reserved for my family, and none of my friends really spoke Vietnamese to each other or knew Vietnamese. So
interesting. Phong Lê. Is that the rapper who is sort of who just flies off the handle with all like this? He's very irreverent. Is that the one?
I think he's like into crypto and like NFTs or something now. Yeah, I mean, he had this song, oh man, and I remember like rolling up in the Honda Odyssey with my pops, and I'd be like, hey, like, have you heard this kind of Vietnamese music? I will play Phong Lê and immediately be like, hey, ta cái nhạc đó nha, nghe là nhạc mi đen á. And I was like, wait a minute, like it's not, right? Like it's a Vietnamese rapper, but he's rapping about things like lấy tiền cho gái, and right? And my dad, like, he looked at me and he was like, mày có biết cái này có nghĩa gì không, right? Like, do you really know like what this means? And so I didn't. I thought it sounded dope, and it wasn't until later that I realized, right? Like,
I mean, his stuff is so vulgar, and like, my brother likes that kind of stuff. He's into the really irreverent, no holds bar, and Phong Lê was doing that. Guy was so out there, and but he was so creative, such a creative. But yeah, his stuff was like crossing the line. I mean, constantly.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it too, like I was talking about how my family ended up in Lancaster to get away from gang life and gang violence, and these guys had a song that's called Vietnamese Gang, right? Where they literally say like "Giết mấy thằng nào ta không biết," right? And I'm like, oh man, like that sounded dope then, but thinking about it now, maybe it was a good thing to that my parents kind of winged me to stay away from that.
When I was growing up, we grew up about a mile away from USC, and USC is in a rough neighborhood. And all I remember was like there was like these neighborhood Vietnamese women who were like basically aunts, bordering older sister, borderline aunts to me, and they attended USC, and they were close friends, in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And I remember they would go to the USC VSA parties, and from that point on, I was like maybe 12, 14, always said, when I get to college, if I ever get there, I am definitely going to be part of that, because
Wait, you said the ants were coming to these VSA parties?
yeah, because I was a young kid, and these older women, they were they're probably 18 at the time. Yeah, they're
Right.
18, and I was like 12, 14, whatever. And I remember, they lived a block away, 2 blocks away, and we had 30 people in our house. So they would make friends with, we were all friends, and I would
Right.
remember that they would go to these parties, and at 12 or 13, 14, we were old enough to sort of want to party, my brother and I, and we wanted to go.
Right.
We would show up, and obviously everybody's a lot older, 6 years older, but I remember the camaraderie. It was, yeah, and again, it was, they only spoke Vietnamese there too. It wasn't,
Right.
it was in the 80s, and I've always wanted to be a part of it, no matter what. But as I got a little older, that meaning changes, right? That meaning, for somebody who I'd just gotten out of the military, when I got back into when I got to USC, it was different. But my brother and I were very, very active. He ended up becoming the president of VSA for his third or fourth year at USC.
Oh, wow. Oh, so we share a Vietnamese VSA lineage
Yeah,
a
yeah,
little
we
bit there.
deep. Yeah, oh, we're big VSA guys. We loved it, and across the city was UCLA, and a lot of the people that UCLA, and I know from those years. I mean, sometimes we're in companies together, working with each other as a result of VSA. So it's a very powerful network that I actually want to talk to you about with this whole UVSA. So
Yeah.
how did you get involved with it after or whenever? When did you get involved with it?
Yeah. I'm like, let me hit you with the timeline. It was 20, I graduated with my undergrad in the fall of 2016. Um, so got this degree in Asian American Studies, Ethnic Studies, not really sure what I wanted to do. I was thinking about going to grad school. And at the same time, Trump was elected, right? And I think at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, I started to really think about what my role was, not in allowing that to happen, but if I could prevent something of that scale to happen again, right? And that's actually, kind of as a precursor to my VSA experience that led me to find Chut Nguyen and Pivot, the Progressive Vietnamese American Organization. And in 2017, I think they were just starting, and they were
Wait, how,
starting this
how did you find him? Sorry, how did you find him?
Oh, there's this blog, Angry Asian Man, that I would frequent.
Phil
And
Hughes.
so yeah, Phil Yu's blog.
Mhm.
And I think they had done a profile on Chut Dong. And he was talking about like this Vietnamese resistance, right? And the beating heart of ethnic studies in me was like, all right, like if we're in for a revolution, if we're in for a resistance, then not count me in, right? Like because I have Hai Tai Trong, right? Like I'm free, I have time, and I'm really thinking about like at this point, as I'm kind of coming in more into my Vietnamese identity, right? Having been 3-4 years away from home, I'm like, what does community look like? And so I sent a cold email to him, had a chance to talk with him, and then joined Pivot. And so since then, I've been part of their youth arm, youth engagement arm, to get folks civically engaged, but also to do some electoral work, right? Especially because at that point in time, and just some more context is that, as a part of the Young Vietnamese Americans Committee, we had put together this Young Vietnamese American survey. And we try to survey as many Vietnamese folks from ages like 18 to 35 about like what they cared about politically, right? Because there was this overwhelming sense that like Vietnamese Americans were supporting the Republican Party and supporting Trump. And so we ended up doing that survey. And the thing that had stuck out was that Vietnamese American youth were generally apathetic to politics, right? For one reason or another, they weren't looking to get involved. And for me, I think that was I think it was shocking to me at first, right? Because a lot of our outreach we did to the VSAs, right? The individual VSAs at colleges, regional VSAs, and to Unafsa. And I was thinking like, wow, like there are all these Vietnamese people, Vietnamese students getting together to organize, right? And yet they feel the sense of like apathy towards like a lot of what I've had felt was one of the most pressing issues of that time, right? And also kind of linking it back to my own history. You know, my grandfather was a colonel in the Vietnam Cộng Hòa, and he had also gone to oh man, I forget the name, but it's like the officer school, like a Sĩ Quang school or something like. Yeah. Sĩ Quang Đà Lạt Võ Bị or something. Yes. So
That's
I
like
had grown up
the West Point of Vietnam.
Yes, exactly, right. And so and then my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who I grew very close with, she was a young biu, or like a representative in the government. And so for me and my family, and I'm sure, well, I'm sure for other Vietnamese American families, right? Like there is this like very inherent political tie. Like the political and the personal for us has always been intertwined. And so you know, kind of going back to the survey and the results, seeing that folks were apathetic, I was like, oh damn, like I think we need to do something about this, right? And I don't know, I'm gonna like for the folks that are watching, like this is I'm showing a on my wall. There's a Yang Ba Sap Dao, or the Vietnamese heritage flag hanging, and I received it from my dad when I had first left for college, and he was like, you know, take care of this, right? And we had it in a box at our house for a long time, and he had passed it on to me. And so you know, I'm looking at this flag, I'm thinking about it a lot. I'm thinking about my Vietnameseness and what this flag represents and how it also represents the diaspora. And so as a part of Pivot, I put together a workshop on Vietnamese American political identity, which is something that I think at that time we hadn't really had a chance to talk about amongst the student space. And while I was applying to graduate school and ended up getting into and started to attend my master's program in Asian American Studies at San Francisco State, that's, I think, when I kind of assumed this role of, I felt more comfortable being referred to as a mentor in the Vietnamese American community space. And I started to apply for workshops on behalf of Pivot to present on Vietnamese American political identity. And so that's how I kind of found myself in NorCal UVSA at their summit, and then slowly was able to present, I think, in the Midwest, in Louisiana at the not Louisiana, in Georgia at the Unafsa conference then. And then since then I had been on, you know, this workshop tour where I was talking to young Vietnamese students about this sense of apathy that we generally had as a community, about how our identity as Vietnamese Americans, as descendants of refugees, was inherently political, and how in that way, maybe that motivation, that history, that heritage would motivate us to become civically engaged, right? Because I think, you know, working with the UVSAs and UNAFSA, we're working in a 501c3 nonprofit space. Pivot is a C4. And so a lot of that youth engagement really was through the vehicle of being civically engaged, getting people out to vote, and informing people about, you know, the issues that we felt mattered.
Real quick, what's a C4?
It's a nonprofit organization that is allowed to do political electoral work.
Oh wow, that's very specific. There's probably different campaign, you know, all of that stuff associated with C4. Got it. Never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, we usually hear about 501c3 nonprofits, right? And a lot of the VSAs, I think, well, not the school ones but the regional ones in UNAFSA are their own standalone 501c3 nonprofits. So.
Now, let me do a quick segue over to who you call Chut, which is interesting because, you know, I actually thought you were like my age. I can't say that to a woman, but I could say that to another man because, you know, I don't think you'd be offended by saying that you look a lot older and you carry yourself a lot older. I actually thought you were in your 40s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Had no idea. I was doing the math. I was like, okay, 2016, you were probably 22 and you're not even 28, 29 yet, are you?
Yeah, I'm 27 this year, turning 28
Holy
next year.
shit.
Yeah.
You've accomplished so much, Philip. Yeah, because you call him Jutong, and I'm like, that's so weird. But going back to Jutong, um, I would probably be calling him Anh Tông. I've never had a conversation. We've probably exchanged some messages. But Anh Tông is Viet Thanh Nguyen's older brother, correct?
Yes, yes, correct.
Yeah. It's interesting that he's a doctor and he's held some fairly high positions beyond his being a doctor professionally. Um, High, what I mean is, in his role as a medical doctor, I think he's been over at the NIH and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and I think actually thinking back to it, he was featured on Angry Asian Man Phil Yu's blog because he was part of the White House AAPI commission. He was the commissioner, the commissioner that had stepped down once Trump had been elected. And when he had stepped down from the White House in his role, that's when he started Pivot.
What the hell did their parents feed them?
Honestly, yeah, I mean, he's also, I mean, he's Harvard educated, Ivy League educated, and teaching at UCSF, and we all know An Viet is a, and it's weird because I wouldn't call Viet and Jiu Viet because I don't think we have that kind of relationship, but An Viet is obviously a Pulitzer Prize winner, but I would say at that same time while Jutong was getting that recognition from stepping down at the White House, that's when An Viet was winning the Pulitzer for the Sympathizer, right? And so I felt that call, right? This moment of Vietnameseness happening in the mainstream, and I was like, if I'm not a part of it now, I'm going to miss the wave, right? So
Yeah, you're right in the heart of it. You literally are right in the heart of it with Viet Thanh Nguyen and his brother Anh Tông. It's you're right place, right time in history, all of it, and to be so young to witness it. I mean, it's like to be in the mix with all these amazing brothers or uncles, but Chutongs.
right.
You know,
We've also drank a lot of cognac together on that Axelson show too, so more like uncles.
yes, that's how we met the first time, you and I, through one of these shows that you. But we'll get into that. I
Right.
want to. I want to ask you about the different levels of Vietnamese student associations because I've always been interested in that. I've seen Unafsa, UVSA, I've seen VSA, VSU, all of these different abbreviations. But I kind of wanted to ask you, like today, what are the biggest umbrella organizations, and then how does it break down from there, and how does the ecosystem work together?
Yes, and I would lean into that. Is that the VSA space, as we refer to it, is definitely an ecosystem. I wouldn't. It's a network more so than an umbrella. I would say that. Well, starting from UNAFSA, which is the organization that I'm a part of, that I represent as its president, it stands for the Union of North American Vietnamese Student Associations. So, Vietnamese students across North America, United States, and Canada compose the constituency that UNAFSA represents and supports. And so, UNAFSA generally in its history has been fairly well known for the UNAFSA conference, which rotates in location throughout North America. And so UNAFSA itself is a standalone 501c3 organization. And a part of our organizational structure is that we have regional representatives. And so I think there are 14 regions across North America that have a stake and say in the representation of UNAFSA and its decision making. So I was elected by representatives from each of these 14 regions, and the location of the conference is determined by these representatives. And so on the regional level, right? So there are a couple of regions to name them. There's SoCal, NorCal, the South, which is composed of Texas, Oklahoma. There's also the Midwest. There's Eastern and Western Canada. There's Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast. I mean, they're different regions across North America, and they're represented by their Vietnamese students are represented by regional UVSAs. And those UVSAs are United Vietnamese Student Associations. Some of them are also referred to as intercollegiate Vietnamese student associations. And so depending on which region we're talking about, they might have different names, but generally, regionally, Vietnamese student associations are organized depending on their region. And oftentimes those individual regions for those that support both Vietnamese students, young professionals, and communities in those areas are their own 501c3 nonprofits as well. And then on a more micro level, we have the individual Vietnamese student associations, VSAs, or Vietnamese student unions, VSUs, depending on which school we're talking about, where individuals at these universities are participating in a student organization at their university, right? And that student organization can opt into being a part of this regional representation and have representation within Unafsa, this org that represents North American Vietnamese students. That was kind of a long-winded answer, but that's my sense of how the structure, how that ecosystem works. And at the end of the day, I feel like we find ourselves on things like subtle Viet traits and subtle VSA traits now in the virtual era. But prior to the pandemic, a lot of what I had seen, and I think what had motivated me to get involved in this work too, is that each of the individual regions has their own leadership summit or leadership conference, where they bring together like local and national workshop hosts, guests, keynote speakers, students from across these different regions and across these different spaces to interact with each other, to get together, right? To be able to learn and understand more about the Vietnamese North American identity and experience. And I think, kind of talking to the experience that you had in that house next to USC with the VSAs, right? I think a lot of these connections are really built over this idea of a tâm sự, right? Because at the end of most of these Vietnamese VSA conferences, right, after programming hours are over, or at night in the hotel, and I don't know officially if I'm supposed to say this, but there might be parties or drinking involved, right? And there might be like these spaces where we're able to kind of connect to each other on a much more intimate level, in the form of a tâm sự, which is, I feel like, how we heal, honestly, and how we better understand who we are and where we come from, is to be able to talk about those things that matter to us in a way where we don't feel judged, right? And in a way where we feel like we don't need to really explain too much about who we are and where we come from to each other. And so the VSA space in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a powerful opportunity that we can afford the young people that we live in a place where we live in a world in Northern America where it's predominantly white, and to be offered this safe, I would say, opportunity to open up and be who we want to be is it's a vital thing to life almost.
Right. And it's surreal too. Excuse me. Oftentimes, I think it's surreal. One of the first places that I had gone to as a part of Pivot to do this workshop on Vietnamese American political identity was in Cleveland, Ohio. The Midwest region was having their conference called VIA1, and to meet folks from Ohio and from Nebraska and from Minnesota, and to know that their experience was so similar to mine, someone having grown up in Southern California, was, it was truly breathtaking. It feels very strange when you have that sense of camaraderie with folks that you would think they grew up in such a different place, that they would be so different from you.
Yeah, but there's so much commonality and stickiness within our the things that we share.
Right.
So you all of a sudden, I'm like jump a few years into this, and you're the president of this massive organization. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think that's my answer to that. I think a lot of it had to do with the pandemic, and I think a lot of it has had to do with just in the past couple of years, from my observation, we've seen a lot of political vitriol, and we've seen a lot of division happen with respect to politics, not just among Vietnamese, well, that have pervaded in a lot of ways the relationships between the Vietnamese child of refugee immigrants and their parents, right? We know that misinformation, disinformation has made its way into our families. And we also know that being in the circumstances of the pandemic have inflated or exacerbated the impact of misinformation. And so it was right before, actually, no, it was this is my second year of being the president of Unafsa. And so there was a special election that was called because prior to me, okay, so backtracking, at the last in-person conference that we had that was held in Vancouver, Canada, UNAFSA had only elected an external vice president and an internal vice president. And so the positions of president, treasurer, and secretary were vacant. And since then, the pandemic hit. And I think from my observation, the sort of moral compass or the objective or purpose of UNAFSA or the VSA space, I think was in a flurry, because at the same time, this VSA space had been faced with a lot of difficulty, especially when it came to conversations around Black Lives Matter, around gender and sexuality, and generally around the safety of a lot of the members of the community. And so for me to have been, most of my participation was as a workshop presenter. And at that time I was on as a part of the executive board for the Northern California region. I felt like there was this call to action, this call to responsibility to apply, to run for election as its president, and to hopefully push UNAFSA to where I felt like we could have the most impact, right, and reach the most people, and really begin to talk about these issues that I really have an impact in the communities that we're a part of, right? Beyond just being Vietnamese students getting together because we're Vietnamese, right? I think there's more of a purpose that can be had within the Vietnamese Student Association space when we think about how we interact in the world as Vietnamese people. And so I took it upon myself and utilized, I took it upon myself to have critical self-consciousness be a part of my platform when I ran for president, and it just so happened to allow me to take on this position and to lead the organization to what I hope will be great success. And I think it has been, and just as a sort of a bit of a recap for UNAFSA thus far, for the past 2 years, we've had virtual conferences that have amassed over a couple hundred of Vietnamese students from across North America and across the world actually attending, with workshop presenters and with keynote speakers that have represented a much more diverse and multifaceted Vietnamese diasporic experience. And so one of the questions that I think about now is UNAFSA has traditionally been confined to North America. Is there a possibility for UNAFSA to be more of a diasporic organization? Is there a possibility for us to bring together Vietnamese students, young professionals, alumni from across the globe in the diaspora to be able to organize and have these conversations and to be able to thumb sue with each other and learn from one another? So
I hear you.
That's how I kind of ended up here.
Yeah, I hear you changing the name to something like UD VSA or something like that.
Right.
Diaspora. Yeah, it's kind of limiting, right? At where it's at right now with UNAFSA, the Union of North American,
right,
VSA. So
yeah, and I mean our identities are of course different, right? Like we can't say that someone from the United States is going to share the same identity as someone that's a Vietnamese Australian or someone who's Vietnamese French, but in sort of my understanding of the history of UNAFSA and how we were founded, we took the current form that we have as an organization from Vietnamese student associations that had started in places like France and Australia and kind of mobilized around that. So if we could do that then, when a lot of us were coming had been coming as refugees, right? Like looking to try to carve out these spaces to build community. Why wouldn't we be able to do that in a time like now when we're hyper connected virtually, right? But that's sort of long term. At this point, I think it's been really successful that Unafsa has been able to talk about things like Black Lives Matter, to talk about things like the insurrection, and the presence of the Vietnamese heritage flag at the Capitol. And it's kind of marked this cultural shift in the heart of Vietnamese, the diaspora, the student diaspora, right? And one thing that I would like to highlight about that, UNAFSA also raises a lot of money for nonprofit beneficiaries. We have this project called the Collective Philanthropy Project, where all of the related VSAs to UNAFSA raise money towards a single beneficiary. And in the past, it's been beneficiaries that have been involved in work in Vietnam, in the homeland. We've raised, up to $150,000, right? And just in this past year, the UNAFSA constituency has selected the Asian Prisoner Support Committee, which does work with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated and deportees, right? These communities as its collective philanthropy project beneficiary. And so we're really seeing a shift in what it is that we care about as an organization and as a community, and what it is that we do. So it's really, I think it's really inspiring.
It is. It really is. Have you been to a UNAFSA event in person?
Yes. Not in my role as the president,
of course,
but as a workshop presenter and as a family head.
And they're fun.
Yes.
I went, I think in 2011 or 12 in Denver. Yeah, we went to go promote a movie, and I was so inspired, but there was a lot of people. It wasn't just a couple of hundred kids. It was like a lot, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think the largest UNAFSA conference may have been like at least maybe 1,000, up to 1,000.
Yeah, it was, in my memory, it was easily like at that size. It was at a convention center or something like that, on that scale in Denver, and it was so refreshing to see so many Vietnamese kids at that time being so involved and activated.
Right, and I might also want to add that it really isn't just about this civic or political work. It's also a lot of just being able to express and experience culture. One of the mainstays of all VSAs, I feel like, is a culture show or a culture night. And in a lot of ways, I saw that as a kind of an emulation of the Paris by Night and the Trung Tâm Asia and the, those sorts of shows that we had grown up watching. To be able to recreate that from a younger generation's experience has been really affirming to me too.
Do you know if that's like mainly in our community? Is it like that in the Filipino or Persian or, other communities?
Ooh.
This talent show, sort of like hodgepodge.
Right, like a variety show.
Yeah, because my brother and I really loved it. We really got into it. My brother was like one of the first guys to put he would do these commercials, video. I think it was like one of the first shows we've ever seen, back in 98 or something like that, 99, where he made like commercials, and they were comedic, funny, commercials that spoofed on things. And it was like the first time, every time the scene changed, like in a play or, and then the lights would go off, and then, you'd have to move furniture around on the stage. My brother would he would project like a 4-minute commercial back to back, 2 or 3 of them, and directed them, and they were funny as hell. So I wonder if other communities did it out at the university level.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard of Filipino culture nights. I think there's a really big the spirit of theater and of performance that exists in the Filipino American community. I haven't really, to be honest, I haven't seen something on the scale of a VSA culture show just yet. Like I know the one at Berkeley, it fills up Zellerbach Hall, which is the main auditorium at Berkeley, and I think it's like a $30,000 or $40,000 project each year. So
right, Yeah, they're big, especially USC and UCLA. I haven't been to one in many years, but I would love to go and check those out. They're fun. They're a lot of fun. See what the
Right.
how they're like ingenuity, entertainment ingenuity at the most raw level.
Right. And the parents come out and
Yeah.
like, the younger cousins come out and it's really a family ordeal. So,
Yeah, it's great. It's a great time of year for your child or your student that attends these universities.
mhm.
Speaking of university, was it something that you always wanted to do, teach at the college level?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, switching it up. No, I don't think it was. I think I kind of stumbled into it as well.
Everything is
My
you stumbling into these things
I'm
at
just stumbling it. Yeah, I just
the
happened to
highest
be in the
level,
right place at the right time. Yeah.
but no plan. I mean, that's the beauty of this all.
Yeah. Vietnamese folks believe in fate, so I'm
Yeah.
just kidding. But yeah, I feel like it's very fateful. I didn't realize, I mean, I've been asking my parents a lot now about what we did or what our family members did and our grandparents did in Vietnam before they had left. And so a lot of them were involved in teaching. And so I kind of didn't know that as a part of my own heritage. But um, having stumbled into Asian American studies, I had actually wanted to pursue a PhD after finishing my undergraduate degree, because I wanted to emulate these professors that had such a profound impact on me and my understanding of identity through Asian American studies. Right, I really did feel like it was a sort of cultural awakening, and so. Didn't get into a couple of PhD programs after graduating from undergrad. I think I could have used a little bit more focus, and I didn't really know. I think then what the qualifications were, or what the kind of grit that you needed to have to really silo yourself and focus and be a part of the academy or the ivory tower. And so I ended up getting into a graduate program in Asian American Studies at San Francisco State. And I think through there, and I want to speak to a lot of the mentors that I had, Professor Isabel Pelode, Professor Mai Nyung Lei,
Oh, wow.
a lot of the folks, at San Francisco State in the College of Ethnic Studies, it's one of the only places that once had a Vietnamese American Studies Center. And so there had been this history of Vietnamese American scholars at San Francisco State. DVAN, another organization that I work with, has a pretty significant presence at SF State. And so I was able to explore a little bit more about Vietnamese American literature, identities, history, and then ended up writing my thesis on intergenerational trauma amongst Vietnamese American college students, which kind of ties into this VSA, Unafsa narrative of coming and belonging, right? Of becoming and belonging. And so it really, I'm not sure. I think being able to lead these sorts of workshops, to facilitate these sorts of discussions, to feel like when I was able to share my insights and just lived experiences with my students as a graduate student, as well as in these VSA spaces, I felt really affirmed that maybe teaching could be the thing that I was good at, and if I was good at it, then I would be able to pursue it. I think if I could point to a watershed moment if I could point to that moment where I was like, yeah, I think I should do what I can to become a professor. One of the workshops or one of the lesson plans that I had done about the Vietnamese flag and about my family's heritage and history, and about this quote that's in Phillip Nguyen's "Nothing Ever Dies." That all wars are fought twice, the first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory, right? I had actually on a winter break presented that, got the slides ready, put it on the big screen, the TV at the house, and went through it with my parents to talk about what sort of reactions I was getting from my students. I remember being into it, doing my pseudo lecture with my parents, looking back at my dad, and he was crying, and I was like, what are you crying about? And he didn't really explain to me much at that point, but later as I was thinking about it, I think the motivation for me to pursue teaching and pursue the path of education really comes from my parents reminding me that I should always học giỏi, cố gắng and giữ gìn sức khỏe, right? Like those are the three things that they kind of embedded in me. And they oftentimes reminded me that education has always been something that they wanted me to put a focus on, because when they experienced re-education camps, they experienced the communist regime, they experienced being a refugee. Education has always been one of the only thing that no one can take away from you. And so, with that, after conferring my master's in Asian American Studies, one of my mentors, Professor Isabel Pilode, offered me a section of her Vietnamese American Literature class. And so since then, I've been able to teach in Asian American Studies and share my knowledge with the students that I've been able to be a part of their journeys, right? So.
Yeah, Isabel was on the show a few moons ago, and she is another person who said education was something she stumbled upon. It wasn't like she set out to be an academic or write a book or anything. She was like happy-go-lucky and, wandered around, I think, LA. And then one thing led to another, and, here she is creating all of this wonderful pathways for people like us.
Yeah, and I think she had worked in a nail salon at one point in time too, right? And I think, and now she's like the godmother, like one of the OGs of Vietnamese that had written about Vietnamese American literature. Yeah. And so we're seeing so much success from so many Vietnamese authors in the diaspora, and Vietnamese American narratives being propelled into the mainstream. It wouldn't be without her and the work that DVAN has done, and a lot of the folks that trailblazed the path for the stories to be told. So
I'm going to put you on a spot in a good way. And putting you on the spot means, for me, like right now, I'm going to ask you a question about a certain memory. And if you don't have it, then we can move on to the next topic, and then you could hopefully it could percolate in your mind. But I always want to ask people who teach in a classroom, what were some of your most memorable classes that you've had with students, and why? If you can jog your memory, it doesn't have to be now. Like I just said, I put you on the spot, but I always wonder, is there in the last few years somebody or something that happened in one of these classrooms that go, holy shit, that's like mind blowing?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say I've been teaching since fall of 2019. So this is my third year teaching. And I would say in the past couple of years, I've been teaching, or the past year and a half, I've been teaching online, virtually, right? So to think about, a memory, I want to say one of the most pressing memories that I've had, and maybe this isn't like mind-blowing in a good way, but one of the things that students who are Vietnamese, who take classes in Vietnamese studies or Vietnamese American studies, take for granted, the kind of effort they might need to put in. And so I've had a lot of students who are of Vietnamese American descent slack in my classes and not participate in the lecture or in the material or whatever it is, right? And I've also had a lot of non-Vietnamese students take my classes who become really engaged in the material because, a lot of what they're learning about trauma, kind of they're able to tie to their own experience and relationships with their families. One of the most memorable experiences that I've had actually comes from a student that I had that was a recent immigrant from Vietnam. And she, I remember she engaged in the class in a way that she mentioned during discussion that a lot of what she was learning in the class, has never been taught in the classes that she had taken in Vietnam, right? Mm-hmm. And that actually she wouldn't be able to go back and tell her parents who were in Vietnam about the content that was being taught in the class. And I thought that was fairly mind-blowing, right? That, to learn about the breadth of Vietnamese American history, identity, culture, and how it's experienced in the United States, like that those experiences would be censored, right? In a, yeah, right, and muted in the Vietnamese educational process. And that same student actually introduced me to a film that was made in Vietnam, which is called Ya Go Hoài Lang, or Hello Vietnam, that had Hoài Linh and now the late Ji Tai as the main characters. And those characters were going through the process of, you know, growing old in the United States, being sent to a nursing home with their young Vietnamese American children who didn't understand where they came from. And so that was really mind-blowing for me, because it became this, like, someone who, this was their first class in Asian American studies. They took a Vietnamese American identities class. They had no prior knowledge of any of the content that we were learning about, and was able to introduce me to a film that I now use in my classes to iterate that point, right? That intergenerational divide. And so to have students like that, I think has been really, has truly been mind-blowing and breathtaking, right?
That was a cool film. I liked it. It was a funny, you know, Hoài Linh's a comedian, and to see him take on a more serious role,
right?
You know, it's fascinating.
Yeah, funny, sad. There's weed involved, which is like not something that you don't really see in a Vietnamese film. So,
yeah, there's so many good moving out of Vietnam.
Yes, and I mean, I gotta, you know, give props to where they're due, and I'm sure you're a part of that, right? And I see that Micah, the new children's film, is coming out soon, so just shout out to that.
Thank you. Yeah, Sundance, Hamtran, Jenny Chang Lei, all those folks put that project together, and Anderson Lei, you know, worked very hard to get it to Sundance, and you know, unfortunately, it was canceled this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, on Hamtran, Hamtran, right? Journey from the Fall is what I start all of my Vietnamese American Studies classes with. Like we have got to talk about Journey from the Fall, right? Like as one of the, and what he went through in the process of getting that film made, right? Yeah, to be able to really get, because I think a lot of my students now are maybe second generation, third generation, right? Like their parents are the children of refugees, and so that history is so much more distant. And so movies like Journey from the Fall, I also show Bola Now 52, right? Mm-hmm. To really iterate and reiterate the hardships that these Vietnamese American refugees faced.
Green Dragon is up there too.
Oh, yes.
Green Dragon by Tim Bowie really showcases what, you know, I think it would be right up there with Journey from the Fall. Journey from the Fall is a little bit more stronger in terms of, you know, the depictions being a little bit more traumatic.
Right.
And I think Green Dragon's like what went on in the camps, and, you know, the kind of thought process that refugees had trying to find their footing. I actually that was my first film that I worked on, is Green Dragon. I was an extras coordinator for Tim Bowie.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that was what, like a couple decades ago?
Yeah, it was a couple decades ago. It was like 2000. Yeah, I think he was putting the project together in 99, 2000. I think, yeah, they shot in 2000, 2001, around that time period. Yeah, two decades ago.
Oh man, and it's crazy to also think too that, you know, Vietnamese American history is only not even 50 years old yet, right?
Yeah, it's not even 50 years old yet. There's a few other bullet points that I want to ask you about, but since we're here right now, I'm wondering, are there metrics that you have, and they don't have to be like, you know, official KPIs, but just sort of your own internal metrics on how we're improving as a community, the Vietnamese community here in America?
Ooh, how we're improving as a community as a whole.
Yeah, or is it degrading? Are we falling apart? I mean, how do you see it? And are there metrics that you say, you know, this is what I can point to that we're getting better, or this is what I can point to as we're really sliding off the face of the earth, you know, like everything's crumbling?
Yeah. I think one of the indicators for me has been a lot of the elder generation have been a little bit more sympathetic
Oh,
to the, I think they've been a little bit more sympathetic. And that's, that's not to say that there isn't a very large part of that generation that, like, sometimes I hear that those, what's that guy, Nguy Vu
yeah.
on Last Week Tonight, right? Like that type of show on the phones of a lot of my uncles, right? Sometimes even my dad. I like go in and I block those channels from his YouTube. But some of those shows, right? Like they still are very pervasive in our elder community. But I think there are a lot of, at least through my work in San Jose's Little Saigon, right, in the Vietnamese American community there, I've seen a lot of elders be much more sympathetic to having conversations, right, and having these open conversations with the younger generation, and really encouraging the younger generation to step in. One of the places that I've been able to be a part of is and work with is the Viet Museum in San Jose, and it's like the Vietnamese Museum, the History of Boat People in the Republic of Vietnam Museum. That's in History Park and Kelly Park in San Jose, and the one of the founders, Ông Loc or Bac Loc, he was also an OG colonel in Vietnam Cộng Hòa, and he came here and he started this museum. And in the museum are a lot of relics of war, right, and of the boat people experience. But in San Jose, he was also one of the first people to write about why Vietnamese Americans should support the Black Lives Matter movement, right? In Vietnamese. And yeah. And so like, it's stuff like that.
And where does he lean on the whole spectrum?
I mean, I would say he's a little bit more progressive minded, definitely, right? But his tenure, right, and his pedigree as like a former soldier and a mainstay, a pillar of the Vietnamese American community in San Jose, I think it speaks volumes, right? And he's also, I remember a conversation I had with him, and he's one of the, he mentioned that the Vietnamese American community has always, at least in San Jose, has always been caught up in thinking about leadership, and that we have too many leaders, right? Too many leaders that want to get their point across and, stake their claim to the Vietnamese community and represent it. And so he's also really been pushing for efforts of community-based organizations, these nonprofit organizations, right, that are oftentimes led by the younger generation of folks to get together and organize and be able to open up those intergenerational bridges of conversation and dialogue. I would say that sort of experience, to see a lot of the elder generation being more sympathetic to the causes of the youth, might also be predicated upon just them knowing that they're getting older, right? And that their generation is passing soon. I mean, Ông Loc is, I think, in his 80s now, and a lot of his friends, as he has mentioned to me, have passed away now. And so he knows, there's a recognition that his legacy is going to be carried on by the younger generation. And so in those sorts of moments, I think it's been easier for folks like me, right, or younger than me, maybe the folks in VSA, to also be able to have these conversations about their family's experiences that they might not have had before, right? Like I might say it's a metric that in my Vietnamese American classes, when we do oral history, there aren't as many questions about, who it is that they can reach out to and ask questions from, or ask questions, right? Their parents, their aunts, uncles, their grandparents are much more receptive to sharing their experiences, because they want to pass on this knowledge now, right? Whereas before, I think, and I think there's still a lot of trauma, right? Whereas before, they've been much more hesitant to share these parts of themselves. So.
Yeah, I mean, this acknowledgement of trauma and pain is very critical to our discussion. And I think that to not talk about it and to sweep it under the rug with the older generation, because I always thought to myself, I mean, for the longest time before I was doing this podcast, fuck them,
right?
Their pain, I didn't go through that. But oh my God, that is like the worst way to look at this. Like, you cannot discount people's pain, and you can't let it's natural to want to not feel and empathize for somebody else's shit, especially when it gets in the way of our progress.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, if we don't acknowledge it, we are losing people. We're losing the game, the battle of the divide. And that's not something we want as a community ever. We always have to find something to feel for each other. I mean, that's just the way I see things lately, because I'll be perfectly honest. I was very apathetic to the way the older, and I think it has to do with my dad though too, because my dad was apathetic. He was just like, "What's the big deal, people?" And he was never locked up in the education camp. And I think for him, he had told everybody, like in his family and my mom's family, his in-laws, colonels and big guys, there's like, "Yo guys, we know this is gonna not be pretty. Get the hell out." And I got a boat waiting down in Ratya. I got this. We're chartered. We're good to go. Meet me down here. In 3 days, meet me down here. Some of these guys sent pigeons over the wire, right? And they're like, "Yo, if you get locked up, you're done. We're not coming. We're not gonna bail you out of jail. We're gonna go on living our lives, and this regime is not gonna fall. It's not gonna go down. We're gonna keep it intact." Because all the big guys, I think, thought that they were gonna prevail. They I don't think that they knew the intel the way, or my father read a lot of history, so he knew where this was gonna go.
Right.
And so he asked people like multiple times, "Come down, meet me at the boat." None of them did it. And so by the time he took off, he was like, "That's your bad." So I always kind of carried this sort of weird pride about that, but that is so unhealthy, especially when we're doing the work that we're doing to talk about the trauma and the pain. It's like, no. We have to acknowledge that this is going on. And I think there's a connection to all of that shit, all the way down to something like BLM, because it's the ability to empathize and the practice of empathizing with these people who have completely different experiences than what we have is what's going to make our community better. Bottom line.
Right. I mean, full stop word, like I think we need more compassion and empathy for the elder generation who, in a lot of ways, I also feel that very deep rooted sense of like, fuck them, like, why should we care about them?
Yeah.
This is our home now, right? Like, y'all left your home, and if you don't want to like get with the program here, then, so be it, right? And then I also think about I've also thought about like how that approach furthers that divide, right? Like I see students talking about like how they can't even talk to their parents anymore, right? Because there's so much, like at the dinner table, there's always so many conversations about politics, right? And that turns into this, a screaming contest, a yelling contest about the different, what people stand for and who they support. And so I think thinking about compassion and empathy, and I think thinking about the process of understanding how these issues make their way into our families, right? And how they impact gatherings around the family table. I feel like, oh man, it's hard. It's hard. I think, oh man, I totally just lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I'm going to pick it up from there. I feel like what I think when we're sitting at the family table, for me, is if we keep pulling out guns on each other and trying to prove our point, it gets nowhere. It absolutely goes nowhere. And that's why I think like when we're at the dinner table, the thing that I try to focus on is like, okay, where's our common ground? Where do we share it? And it's gonna sound weird, but I try to beat them at that game. Try to beat them at that game. Like, can you beat me in where we're sharing our common story? Or can you beat me at the love game? Like, uncle, I know you have these like crazy ass prejudice ideas and viewpoints, but I'm not gonna go toe to toe with you there because we're both gonna lose. But right. How about I beat you at the game of compassion and love at the dinner table and unite and let's go back to figuring out the fun times that we had growing up. I have uncles that are 15, 20 years old, but we're very close because
right.
We talk about business and we talk about off-color things and things that happen in Vietnam, and we share things that are not political. And I was like, well, let's focus on that stuff. Let's talk about how wonderful those memories are, and So I find myself now going into that. And these are guys that were never in the war. They were, they were in their, teens when they got to the United States. They were, babies when they got here. But they still carry these heavy, very different viewpoints than I do.
Right, right. And I think going back to this division, I would say highlighting two, I think, really crucial moments in recent Vietnamese American history. One of them has to be the insurrection, right? The showing, the waving of flags, and just the presence of Vietnamese American people at the Capitol. And then the second has to be, and I know you had recently done a show with Tan Tan and Viets for Afghans, the fall of Kabul, right? And the parallels that were drawn between what was going on in Afghanistan and the fall of Saigon. And I think, socio-politically, in world, in world history, those two moments have kind of been places where maybe we're able to find some common ground and share that sense of empathy and compassion for folks that have a similar experience that we do, while at the same time looking at ourselves hard in the mirror and saying, is that really who we are, right? And I'm thinking that, from those points, as we're talking about kind of getting back into family, right? Getting back into the things that tie us to our relatives. And one of the things that I've been able to do much more recently is ask my parents about questions and have them show pictures of themselves back in Vietnam that they were able to bring over with me and start to archive them and organize them digitally. That's just, I think, a personal project that I've been able to take on and really get into my own understanding of my history and where I come from, right? And so I think it's in those moments when we don't feel like we need to talk about the politics, don't need to feel like we're talking about everything that other folks are worried about, right? In the circumstances of the pandemic, when we're so much more isolated and we have so much more time to talk to each other, I think that's definitely been a breakthrough for me, at least in my own in the locus of my Vietnamese community, right? And so, I think as a Vietnamese community, we made a lot of breakthroughs, right? We've been able to accomplish a lot and to have these very important conversations. But I think what the opportunity that the pandemic has offered us is to really think about the things that matter the most to us as a community, right?
Yeah. Now, with the conversation we just had about, like, the elders and, the way we see things, the way they often see things, there is this idea of them and us within our own communities, and the advent of a organization like Pivot or the Cookie Zoong's the translator and
the interpreter,
the interpreter, all of these things, and I've talked to people about this. It's like, how do we walk on this tightrope without falling down? You can't just, like, I feel like we just can't bombard them with this intellectual game of, like, we know more,
right?
We're more informed. We are not getting our shit from really shitty news sources, but that's a losing argument to people who have their ears closed, because now there's, like, older aunts and aunts that I can't talk about this stuff with. There's no way to break through. How do we do that?
Oh man, that's the age-old question. I think what we've been experiencing in the past couple of years, especially with the proliferation of misinformation, Viet fact check, Viet Am vote, Viet COVID, the interpreter, and Người Thông Viet, right? Like, all of these sources that have been vetted by the teams that are working on them, right? With factual evidence being presented in both English and Vietnamese, I think has been really helpful. I think for me, speaking from as a child of refugees with very limited Vietnamese proficiency, right? Like, I took two years of Vietnamese language in college. So, but even then, I feel like it's it's difficult to communicate and really get the essence of what I'm trying to say across, right? Having these resources at hand to be able to share with my family members, my parents, the community, right? And to be a vehicle for that information has been really helpful. And I think one of the things that we've seen during the pandemic, right, I think is this shift in the role that the younger generation plays, right? Like if there is still that kind of relationship or connection between the parents and the youth, like growing up for me, I remember, I was the one that took care of all the government documents that came in the mail from my parents, right? And so I was the one that served as that interpreter translator for them. And so I saw myself, and me, my younger sister and I, taking on that role of being that mediator for this information that has been helpful, and having it already readily available in Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese that they speak to, I think is like a very crucial point. Having that available to them, for them to have access to, has helped, at least a little bit, if not a lot, and has helped us in this fight against this disinformation, right? But I would really say that, I'm working with the Vietnamese American Roundtable, which is I'm the executive director for the Vietnamese American Roundtable, or VAR, that is based in San Jose. And, as an organization, it came together as a group of 1.5 second generation volunteers, really looking to build bridges between the elder and younger generations, right? Through civic empowerment, through civic participation, through community building and events, right? And also through just cultural learning. And I think at the nexus of those three areas of focus, and with the help of the folks that are in the organization, bringing people together in community, right? Whether that be virtual community on Zoom, if our elder generations know how to work Zoom, or whether that be at an event like a Black April or Tháng Tư Đen commemoration, right? And being able to open up those avenues of communication at these sorts of community events where there's a regular interaction of young and old, right? I think has been really helpful in sort of spreading the word, and sharing the resources that we as the younger generation have access to.
How did that get started? The Vietnamese American Roundtable.
Yeah. So I had also stumbled upon the Vietnamese American Roundtable, and had gotten involved because of a couple of the folks that were on the board of VAR had been, I had worked with in Pivot. And so I had known that there was a group of Vietnamese folks in San Jose that were a little bit more progressive minded or youth oriented. The organization itself started with a group of volunteers in 2013. A lot of them folks that were from VA Bank, or that are now attorneys, the Vietnamese American Bar Association of Northern California, folks that were generally representatives or had been taking a part of Vietnamese community and other community spaces that wanted to get together and form a roundtable of input, insights, experience in an organization that really focused on that intergenerational divide. And since then, in 2017, it incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit. In 2019, I was brought on as one of the first part-time program managers. And in this past year, 2021, been really fortunate enough to be elevated to the position of executive director. And so it's a lot of work, Kenneth. I mean, I think working with the Vietnamese American community is tough, because it's just so hard to be able to speak the language that our community speaks, right? And to really get the messaging across, to know that in our best good faith effort, that we're really not trying to leave people behind, right? And that the work that we're doing is not to, like you said, right, to participate in this game where we both lose and that we both feel fatigued from talking about all these issues, but really that we can act, we can mobilize around these issues, we can organize, and we can break bread around the table, or cooling rolls together, right? While talking about culture, while understanding the context of our history, and while sharing that information so that our legacies are not lost in the process, right?
I was literally cuong rolls last night with the three uncles that are on the other side, literally doing that last night.
Right.
It's so funny that you say that.
Cuong rolls and sipping Henny, Henny and Coke.
Yeah, so funny you say that. Have you been back to Vietnam?
Ooh, I have not. I have never been back to Vietnam. And I think that's, if I were to ever want to do a documentary about my life, it would probably lead up to the point where I'm like trying to get back to Vietnam.
Is
My
it
parents have also never been. Mhm.
Ooh, okay. Is it an intentional decision or just because you guys have never gotten to it?
Yeah. Oh, I had always thought that when I go to Vietnam, or when I like về Vietnam, right, or go back home to Vietnam, this place that I have never known as home, that I would be able to bring my parents with me, and that they would be open to uncovering a lot of these places that they had been a part of with me, right? Um, my parents are reluctant, to say the least. Um, my dad, I mean, he works for my dad works for Lockheed Martin, which is a defense contractor. And he's always had this sense that he doesn't want to go to Vietnam, the communist country, because one, it's not the country that he had known and left, and that two, that it would jeopardize his work. Um, whether that's a truthful belief or not, I'm not so sure yet, but I think they've been more or less excuses for him not to go back. We don't have much family there, like cousins, like extended cousins and uncles, aunts. But my relationship with Vietnam has been complicated because I think definitely like I would want to go back. Um, and a part of me also feels like I would want to go back with my friends and hang out in Saigon and party and do all that sort of stuff, right? And experience it for myself. Whereas this other part of me really wants to go back and make that journey, be a part of that journey for myself and with my parents. I will say though that this relationship with Vietnam and what it is now has been kind of, one of the examples I would say that, at home, I watch Rap Viet with my parents. And that's like one of the ways that they've been able to, has kind of uprooted this belief that Vietnam is just this like horrible communist place that where everyone is in poverty, right? And I think those kinds of beliefs I still had held with my parents that contributes to that reluctance. But future journeys to Vietnam, one of the places that over through the pandemic, I was fortunate enough also to start a new relationship, and I think if whenever the pandemic ends, I imagine that I would want to go with her first and explore our homeland together, and then bring that experience back with me to bring my parents back to Vietnam before they pass, because they're getting older. So
yeah, before I get into that conversation, I just want to comment on how adorable, because I think we've been either in contact or on IG or Facebook together for way before we established contact. And I remember following you and just seeing this new introduction to your life, and that kind of stuff, it always warms my heart. It really does. So really, congratulations, and I'm very happy for you.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. And it's rough. It's a long distance relationship. She's Vietnamese from Houston, Texas. So that's a whole nother. I mean, it's also a very surreal conversation that we had when we started the relationship. But I would say, I would be disappointed if you weren't at the wedding. So
oh yes, please invite me. I would 2 seconds. I will be there. I can't wait to attend. With pleasure, I would come.
Yes.
So yeah, going back to this whole parental discussion and Vietnam, I feel like my brother moved there 18 years ago. Mm-hmm. Before then, my family and I, we were going back quite a bit. We have a factory there, and there was a moment I was standing, I think it was a place, I can't remember the name of it, Tao Ding or something. God, I'm so ignorant. I should know this. I was with a friend and his mother. His mother just bought some condos. And I was standing in the courtyard of this high rise. And I was looking around. And I was like, I'm in Singapore. This is Singapore. This is not anything related to Vietnam that my parents or my uncles and aunts talked about, or any of the books that we read. This is a completely different place in the history of what we could imagine. And I remember seeing like, young women with like these cute dogs walking, and it was just like, it was so surreal. And I thought to myself, this is maybe 5 years ago too. And I thought to myself, like, all of my mom and dad's friends that refused to go back to Vietnam, it's literally like being stuck in a different world, different chapter of living in the. They're like stuck in the metaverse somewhere in another person's channel or something like that.
Right.
There's this other shit going on over here that's real in our time, that they have that they refuse to believe that is going on. I mean, these people really believe that Vietnam is like still war torn, impoverished. Everybody's like begging on the streets, and it was like the furthest from that they could. They just refused to look at it. And at that point, I realized that we all have a decision to make. You can either step into this portal and be transported into a different modern age of Vietnam, or you can make the choice to hang on to this really bitter memory, a representation of what it was like, or what you think it was like. So that's like the hardest part that I kind of have to deal with in response to the pain of the memory of what a lot of older Vietnamese people left. And I really, Phillip, I really encourage you to go back to Vietnam as soon as you can. As soon as you can.
I mean, that pain, I feel like I've inherited a lot of it. And I think that's a shame for me, thinking about, and to be honest, I'm scared, right? Like I'm really afraid of what there is that holds in Vietnam, right? Because I also do feel like there has always been this pull for me to be there, right? Or to be in this place or with this place or associated to this place that my parents have called home, or this quê hương, right? That I've never really been able to experience yet, right? Like I'm at this point in my life, I'm not really sure where my quê hương is, right?
Yeah.
And like you were saying, like this portal, like for better or for worse, I've thought that Vietnamese people are time travelers, for better or for worse. And for a lot of like folks like my parents and a lot of the folks that you're talking about too, like their idea of Vietnam is locked temporally, right? In time to this place before 1975, right? And I was also talking about like the language that they spoke and what they wore and the culture and what the hustling, bustling streets look like. And sometimes they are very reluctant. They refuse to move beyond that period of time. It's rough. I think another really surreal, mind-blowing thing that has been a regular practice when I bring up Vietnam with my parents is that my dad and I will go on Google Earth, right? And we'll look. He remembers like all of the old addresses, the places that he used to frequent, and we would pop him into Google Earth, and he would say like, yeah, where that like that cell phone provider building is now, like that's where we used to live, right? Like that's where we had a printing press. And like this street, I remember, I would get into the fights on this street with like your uncles, right? And I think it's always shown me the sense that they want to feel that sense of quê hương as well, but maybe for them it's that much harder to be reconnected to the land that we call home.
Yeah, and often you have to remind yourself that like the people that left, majority of them were people who had a lot of shit. They
right.
A lot of shit, let's just keep it real. They, people who had my parents, several businesses, they had like deep roots, and just to like flip a switch and they're gone and everything's taken away. So there's that
right.
painful memory. And then they rebuild it here and they got their shit going on and it's like wonderful here. It's like, why am I even going to take a minute to even think about like that painful memory that we left behind?
Right.
Yeah. But I could see you in Vietnam, just really, Saigon's like New York on steroids, It really is. It's somebody said on the show, one of my guests, he said, yeah, Saigon is like twice the size and energy of a New York. And it's like, if you don't get to experience that you're really missing out in life, you know. It's got nothing to do politically with anything else other than that it is it's quite a show. You know, when you step inside of District 1, or, you know, you're on the different areas in District 1, and it's just like, you see all the charming things about the culture, and then it's like magnified because it's like in your face, and it's like just the environment and the ambiance of all of the traffic and the sights and the sounds. It's it's a very special place.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm longing for it now, you know.
It's you know, I hope to talk to you one day when you come back from it. And, you know, do you listen to Vietcetera or watch anything from Vietcetera?
I do. Yes.
Yeah. Their podcasts that they put out, there's 6 or 7 that they do, I think 22 this year that they added on. But if you listen to some of them, like Gai Ma with Thuy Minh, or some of these, you're like, wait, they're much more advanced than our San Jose OC community. The way of thinking, these young women and men have a completely, they're going to talk about condoms and safe sex, and they talk about, you know, their professional LinkedIn strategies. You know, there's all kinds of stuff that they carry
like the
on.
life and times of a young professional, of young Vietnamese professional, right?
Completely.
In the diaspora. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, in Vietnam.
In Vietnam. Wait, isn't Vietcetera
diaspora
also? Oh,
Vietcetera has 2 arms. They have the Vietcetera that reports on Vietnam, and then they have a Vietcetera International, which more diaspora. But the Vietcetera that I'm talking about is the one that reports on the Vietnamese lifestyle.
I see.
Yeah, and
because Thuy Minh, and there's like Thao Nhi Lê, I think, has a show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and Tuan Le, like, there's all of this like amazing, you know, content that Vietcetera puts out, and you could get a glimpse of what truly is the youth of Vietnam today.
That I probably wouldn't just be able to get through listening to V-pop, right?
and I think V-pop has its place too, right? It has its place in, you know, their music videos, and Vietnamese movies has its place. I mean, all of it creates this new ecosystem that we can turn to as we're making these conversations. And I think it's important because the January 6th day and the flag that you just showed, these are all things that are important in the conversation. But we also have to, I think, combine it with the modern Vietnam and what I don't even think people there, I would venture to say the majority of the people have no idea that we even think about these things. This diaspora, we are so focused on, you know, this myopic point of Vietnamese American history or culture, but like 97 million of those homeland, our country people, they're not, it's not even in their consciousness to it doesn't affect their life at one bit. And here we are living in a reality where it does affect us, and we don't know sometimes if we're of that particular group of people, or we belong to, you know, this whole, I mean, obviously we share aspects of everything, but you know, the reality is not the same for 97 million other people.
Right. Yeah. And oh my God. I mean, that's another mind-blowing thing to think about, is that our families, I mean, at least my family's understanding of Vietnam really is confined to
limited.
Like the 30 years of this like 1,000-year-old history, and how the country itself has grown since for the past 50 years, right? Whereas
it's a fucked up thing to say, but they're limited to Phu Lộc Thọ and the Lion Center, you know?
Yeah. I think it's a fucked up, but really valid. Like, I mean, it's not as fucked up, but I think it's a valid thing to say too, because I mean, I definitely do feel like our community, for all the healing and the resilience that we're preaching about now, has been caught up in constant mourning, you know?
Yes.
And I do feel like we do need to move beyond that and really try to transcend these boundaries that we've placed upon ourselves.
Yeah. But I mean, mourning fatigue.
Yes, definitely.
Morning
And
potato.
that's why all the songs that they listen to are this nhạc jing, like
Oh,
freaking
totally.
dang wing all day.
Dude, totally. And I talked to Cao Ki Ying about this, the host of the MC of Paris by Night, and
Right.
we've had this discussion of like, how is it that um, the majority of the Vietnamese American artists of PBN of Paris by Night, it's sort of like they're stuck in this amberish, fossilized
This like sepia.
snapshot. Yeah, sepia snapshot of exactly sepia snapshot of Vietnamese music. And she broke it down. She's like, we've tried to bring on new acts, and we've tried to bring on like avant-garde performers and people who would stretch but they don't sell.
Right.
They won't sell. She's right. That's such a common sense thing to say, and I don't know why I was always so blinded by the fact that we couldn't evolve into another form of, like, the Americans have rap or jazz. So what could we have innovated? But the dollar value of nostalgia will win out at the end of the day.
Right. Right. And I think sometimes we get really caught in the cycle of nostalgia a little bit too much. And that's that repetition of nostalgia and this constant mourning, and to think about our legacy as always a sense of loss. I think it really muddles, what is it that we have found since coming to the United States, and or since coming from the war and being able to survive. We get so caught up in this act or this process of survival that I feel like for a lot of the older generation, they don't allow themselves to thrive, right? And this might also come from that refugee mindset that, we gotta, as Balfi says, right, like you gotta change the oil in your car your goddamn self, right? And it's like this survivor mentality, this refugee mentality that at times reminds us of where we come from, but also at times prohibits us from really experiencing the full breadth of what being Vietnamese means.
Yeah. Philip, today we've gone over a lot of if not everything, the bullet points that I wanted to get into. We've touched upon many things, and I'm wondering if there's anything that if there's anything left on the table that you'd like to bring up, because I'm sure that, obviously I want you back on the show in a few months or next year or whatever, whenever it's appropriate, and you're reaching out and you say, hey, I have some new stuff and, I want to discuss. But today, is there anything that you'd like to talk about? More stuff that we're leaving on the table?
Oh man. Oh, that's a good. We got a little bit into the media. Literature, you've had authors on the show that have talked about their work and that sort of art. The landscape of Vietnamese America and the sort of generational divide and healing between generations. Oh man, I'm not sure. Have we covered most of it? I think we've covered.
Yeah, we covered most of it and then some. We covered most of that and then some. This idea of Vietnamese writers, I feel like I've only gotten to a few. I've not. It was so weird in the beginning of this podcast journey. I said to myself, I'm never going to go near any podcast episodes with writers, because it would require me to do a lot of reading, and it would just slow me down.
Right.
God, what a fallacy! What a mistake to think about. But yeah, as I'm slowly able to get through the reading now, I'm approaching more writers to come on the show. And Vietnam Nguyen and I have known each other. He was our my last year at VASA USC. He was the incoming advisor.
Oh wow.
Yeah, can you imagine? He was this young, handsome, he looked like a student at the time.
Right.
And so I've had bumped into him many times. Ham Tran used to live with Vietnam Nguyen in LA. And while Ham was here in LA, well, I would go over to Ham's house and hang out with him and Anderson Lay, and we'd run into Viet and Lan, and so there was always this sort of connective tissue. Right. And then not so long ago, there was a Vietnamese parents group here in LA that we I've ran into Viet once there, and because they did it at their house, and then I ran into Viet at the mall, and with his son and my daughter at the time. And I've always wanted to, I think in your the episode that you did, I think the accents, right, with
Yes, it's
Bao
accented. It was with Bao and some of the
yeah,
filmmakers.
I think Carol was on
Yes.
filmmakers and Viet Thanh Nguyen. And that was the first time I mentioned to Viet, like I'd love to have him on the show. But it's like after reading The Sympathizer, there's just, you realize like this is one of the most badass thinkers that we have in the Vietnamese community.
Yeah.
What could I possibly ask him? And I know that's a fallacy in that way of thinking, but yes, I would love to have him on the show and finally, ask him a lot of the questions that I have for him.
Yeah, I feel that same way about him. I mean, still, even after
Really?
putting together these shows with him. Yeah, no, definitely, because I would say that his works, The Sympathizer, Nothing Ever Dies, The Committed, along with T Bui, with another like Land's work, Ian Le Spiritu's work, like all of these scholars that are in Vietnamese American studies that that have been constantly reading and rereading as a part of my own
Wow.
research, right? Like these are my, it's crazy to think that these are my heroes, right? These are a lot of my idols that I've come to admire, and to be able to be in this community space with them. And I mean, like I would say that you and what you've been able to accomplish with the Vietnamese podcast too, and the work that y'all are doing as a collective to amplify Vietnamese voices, and to really reshape and reframe the narratives that we have been so accustomed to, right? It's still very, I still feel like a fan in in so many ways, but to know that there are people out there that are able to capture so eloquently the experiences of our community as a whole,
Mm.
what we've been through, what we continue to go through, while also instilling a sense of their own humanity and what they're still, because there's so much to still think about and grapple with, right, as we continue to evolve. And I'm not sure if this is another conversation topic, but the way that we have been able to evolve through arts and culture, right, and I mean also through what we're seeing with East Films and this this new coming of Vietnamese American representation in film and media, right? I mean, with what East Films has done, The Sympathizer is also going to be made into an A24 series. I know that Ocean Vuong is also getting, it's going to be, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is also going to be made into a movie, I think, right? So this moment of Vietnameseness is,
It's
I don't know. I
badass.
mean,
Hot.
it's badass.
It's badass.
We are hot right now, and
Yeah.
that's the crazy thing.
Yeah. You know, I I had this for a whole year. I mean, I went to the BTS concert a few weeks ago. Up until that point, I was always like, oh, we got to catch up with the Koreans. We got to beat them. And, I talk about this all the time. And now I'm like, no. After BTS, that's a mistake, because how BTS did it is through inclusion and not through some competitive bullshit. And it's just the same with our elders. It's like, if we compete for the airwaves to block them, to get them out of the way, and to surpass we're going to lose this. We need everybody's participation. We need to be inclusive and find where we share similarities. Because otherwise, it's going to be like the Vietnamese racing against the Korean. In my head, I'm
Right.
guilty of that. So now today, it's like you, me, all of the people we've talked about on this podcast. It's now hướng về một hướng đi, which is, how do we unite, and where do we find and celebrate our similarities and our rituals and our pendants, right?
Right.
Where do we dig in there? And so this is the journey that I want to take for the next 2 decades. I would love to do this work for the next 2 decades, and just nerd out on all of the intricacies that we have as Vietnamese people, both connected to the homeland today and people who have left. I think that all of it is valid now.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like the deprivation of Vietnameseness in my own upbringing, I think has really contributed to this desire to really hung đi hung về, right? To really figure out and to feel like the work in the Vietnamese community. And I hope that this is for all the podcast listeners and all the folks that are, you know, for one reason or another inspired by this conversation that we're having, to feel like we're doing work in the Vietnamese community, to being Vietnamese, to understanding how complex Vietnamese identity is, but still being able to embrace it. That it doesn't feel daunting, right? That it really is. It can be as easy as like picking up your phone and listening to a podcast, right? Or picking up a book and reading one, or really hopping onto a YouTube video and watching folks like Andrew Nguyen talk about food and colonialism, yep. Right? That this history and this experience and this knowledge is that so accessible to us. So.
Yeah, Vo Shin Vuong, I think, mentioned something. I hope I'm not butchering this, but this idea of radical okayness, that, you know, we should just be okay with celebrating the beauty of who we are. And it shouldn't be some like extravagant explanation. You know, we should just be okay with celebrating things that don't relate to all of that history. And just like here and now, we're okay, and let's celebrate, let's party, let's, right. You know, do us, we do we. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, with that, this idea of, I think I'm going to try my best to go to Vietnam as soon as I can. I think that I got to be radically okay with coming to terms with that Absolutely. Part of my life. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you probably know a lot of people in Vietnam, and
oh my gosh.
Yeah. At all times, there's people there that we all know, you know, we can just, and you put it on Facebook. You're like, hey, if there's anybody in Vietnam during this window, and you'll get like so many people reaching out, you know, and letting you know, hey, I'm here. And all it takes is a few dinners, and you're like, okay, this is my second home now.
Right.
It's that easy. Yeah. It really is that easy.
Hopefully we'll be able to eat together. I mean, I've only seen those videos about all the Saigon street food. So,
yeah. Well, I think if you're in LA or if I'm in San Jose, we just, let's make that happen. Let's eat locally first in each other's town here in America, and you know, hopefully one day you and I are passing each other in the halls in one of these universities.
Yes, definitely. You know.
That would be something that would be kick ass, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a whole another conversation to have, is that we just do need more Vietnamese American representation, you know, in all walks of life, especially in the academy. So to also be, you know, to start this conversation that we've had this morning off with you thinking about, you know, your own journey of becoming a teacher, I feel like the Vietnamese, this part of our Vietnamese identity is also so rooted in how we're able to share and connect with people.
Yes.
So.
Well, thank you, Phillip. I appreciate your time today. It's always so heartwarming to sit with somebody that you don't know, and after, you know, a few hours, you're just like, oh, let's go get some pho or something.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, Phillip, thank you very much. And don't hang up. I'm just going to end the recording.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Phillip. Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran and Javier Proenza. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcasts. Thanks again for listening.